Intermittent fasting causes infertility. You can't work out in a fasted state. Intermittent fasting slows your metabolism. I'm sure you've definitely heard a lot of these myths before, so today I'm going to be clearing the air on the 10 most popular intermittent fasting myths in today's video. Alright guys, if you're new to my channel and you don't know who I am, my name's Autumn and I'm a certified clinical nutritionist with my master's nutrition human performance. On my channel, I'm typically talking about the science-backed and holistic methods that you can use in order to achieve your wellness dreams. So if you have a wellness goal in mind, make sure you subscribe. Okay, so let's dive into the first, probably most popular intermittent fasting myth, and it's that women can't use intermittent fasting. Now, the reason why I think this myth itself gains a lot of traction is because intermittent fasting itself is misunderstood as a calorie restriction diet, and that's not necessarily true. I mean, people can use it as a way to just restrict calories by simply removing a meal, but that's not inherently what intermittent fasting is. And yeah, starvation mode in general is terrible for female hormones, which is why I don't recommend calorie restriction or calorie counting, period. But intermittent fasting itself is not calorie restriction. It's simply the fact that you're not eating all day. And the fact that intermittent fasting is really great for improving insulin sensitivity can possibly even help some people with issues related to female hormones, especially when you consider that one of the hallmarks of PCOS is insulin resistance. So if you're using intermittent fasting, and especially if you're concerned about female hormones, make sure that you also aren't pairing it with calorie restriction. All right, myth number 2, you can eat whatever you want as long as it's within your window. So this one can be pretty devastating to your goals, because by eating whatever you want during your window can really confuse your body. And with intermittent fasting, you're going from a state of those balanced blood glucose levels, your body tapping into fat burning mechanisms, to possibly all of a sudden a really rapid spike in your blood glucose levels, a rapid spike in insulin, and that really quick shift into storing mode. Now this can happen if you really do eat whatever you want. Like, let's say if you break your fast with Oreos or you have a bowl of cereal, you're basically just undoing all that amazing work that you just did with intermittent fasting by then adding in a surge of blood glucose and insulin. That's why we're always talking about making sure that you break your fast properly with that and nutrient timing, and like with my favorite fat burning smoothie recipe right here. But does this mean that you can never have some of those more treat meal items? No. In fact, this really strict clean eating can also get you into a little bit of trouble with your wellness goals. In fact, there's a study where they had people who strictly stayed on the diet protocol versus those who had one designated scheduled treat day per week. And inevitably, and probably obviously, those who had a scheduled treat day per week were actually able to stick with their goals more long term. Key here is that it's actually scheduled rather than just choosing in that moment whether or not you're going to have a treat meal. Like, for example, almost every Friday night, my boyfriend and I will go get either pizza or pasta because that's a thing that we really love to have once a week. Myth number 3, you'll get hungry. Short answer, no. Especially once you become more metabolically flexible and your body is actually able to use fat as fuel. In fact, because you have this small fasting period with intermittent fasting, it helps to make it so that your body actually gets better at using that fat as fuel, which provides the energy that your cells need, which means that you won't have those hunger cues that are being initiated. But there can be a buffer period of 2 to 3 weeks for some people, especially if you're used to having very high carbohydrate meals. And that's where using keto coffee can be especially beneficial for making sure that your insulin levels still remain low during your fasted period, but you also get those satiating fats. Myth number 4, you can't use intermittent fasting if you're a runner. This is very false, especially if you've ever had a bad experience of bonking or hitting the wall during a marathon race. I had a very bad experience following the traditional type of carbo loading and having those little goos of hitting the wall massively hard during the 2013 LA Marathon, and the whole confusion of having to eat those really highly processed goos at certain times during your run. The idea of being able to tap into your own energy sources rather than these little energy goos is actually pretty intriguing. I know this can seem like a weird concept to actually have more energy while you're fasting, but this can actually train your body to use fat as fuel more efficiently, which means that you won't have to be constantly eating throughout the race, which can cause GI issues or just like the confusion of when you need to be eating these things. And by having your own fuel supply, it can also help to avoid hitting the wall. But like I mentioned, it can take a couple weeks for some people to adjust to this. So if you are training for a marathon and let's say it's in like 2 weeks, I wouldn't necessarily recommend jumping straight into it. Rather, if you're starting your training, then you can start to slowly implement it and adjust your body to this fat burning state where you don't have to rely on these energy goos. I also go more specifically into this in the athlete protocol in the Level Up guide. Myth number 5, you can have collagen or some type of protein during your fasted period. Now here's the thing with collagen or protein. It's still technically has an effect on insulin, although it is buffered a bit because of the hormone that it also promotes, which is glucagon, but it still has an effect on insulin. Not the same amount of carbohydrates, but it can have an effect on insulin. And since the main goal of what we're trying to do with intermittent fasting is to keep the insulin and blood glucose levels stable during your fasted state, then you actually don't want to be having collagen or protein during your fasted state because that can break your fast. So if you're a collagen in your coffee type of person, you can just switch that to your break fast smoothie. Myth number 6, intermittent fasting messes up your hormones. You know what really messes up your hormones? Calorie restriction and extreme exercise. More often than not, a lot of my clients come to me after years of calorie restriction and implementing HIIT workouts or 2-a-days and still gaining weight and also not getting great sleep. That whole combination is very common. And like I mentioned earlier, intermittent fasting is not inherently a calorie restriction protocol. Calorie restriction is what can really mess up those issues, especially if you're a female athlete. You probably heard the female athlete triad or amenorrhea, and this is classically from eating way too little and exercising way too much. And with intermittent fasting of giving your GI tract a little rest each day is not inherently going to mess up your hormones. If you pair it with calorie restriction, then it's just a calorie restriction diet, and yeah, that could. It's not the intermittent fasting, rather what you're doing along with it that really matters. And this is one of the main reasons why I first created the complete intermittent fasting bundle, to help cut through that confusion and to provide clear guidance on how you can actually implement intermittent fasting. All right, number 7, intermittent fasting is just a form of calorie restriction. I've done a video on this in the past where intermittent fasting is not just simply skipping breakfast. There are some protocols you can find online that'll tell you to do this, but as we talked about with myth number 1, this isn't a great idea. You're still eating enough of the foods to stay satiated, have energy, and feel good. You're just eating it less often. This can result in a more stable blood glucose level and improved insulin sensitivity, and therefore more efficient fat burning. This is admittedly a very simplified explanation of intermittent fasting, but if you are interested in those really sciencey details, I have 30-minute long workshops where I really go into the details of this right here. All right, number 8, keto coffee breaks your fast. Now this really depends on what your goal with intermittent fasting is, and this is probably the biggest question that I get out of intermittent fasting. Now, if it's for religious purposes or if you're following a water fast or a dry fast, then yes, you are going to break your fast. Any food will do that. But if your goal is to achieve fat burning and more stable blood glucose levels and insulin levels, then no, keto coffee does not break your fast. Keto coffee contains pure fat, so as long as you're not adding anything in that could break your fast, like sweetener or protein powder or collagen, then you can still reap those benefits of making sure that the insulin and blood glucose levels are stable and so that your body can tap into fat burning mechanisms. Words. Number 9, you have to use intermittent fasting every day. Any amount of intermittent fasting that you use, whether it be twice a week, 3 times per week, 4 times per week, every single day, will help to provide those benefits of giving your gut that rest. So do you need to do it every day? Not necessarily. Especially if there are certain days of the week where it just does not make sense for your schedule, then I wouldn't recommend using it. Remember, we're looking for what is actually sustainable long term. So if it's sustainable for you to do intermittent fasting 4 days a week and to not fast but still follow that proper nutrient timing the other 3 days per week, then that's great. That's still a massive improvement from eating all throughout the day 7 days a week. Number 10, intermittent fasting causes you to lose muscle. Now, first of all, any type of calorie restriction will cause you to lose muscle. But as we've talked about with these myths, intermittent fasting is not necessarily a form of calorie restriction. In fact, intermittent fasting can help to increase growth hormone, which is needed for muscle repair and growth. Where eating all throughout the day can actually suppress that growth hormone. I've also done a video that more specifically touches on intermittent fasting exercise that you guys can check out right here. And if you guys are new to intermittent fasting and you're wondering how long intermittent fasting actually takes to work, make sure you check out this video next. Also, if you're new to my channel and you love the science-backed information, make sure you subscribe right here. Come out with new videos every Tuesday and Thursday. All right, guys, thanks so much for tuning in, and I'll see you in my next video.